vehicle now, or I will drag you out myself!
Step out of the vehicle now, or I will drag you out myself. Agent Derek Caldwell slammed his palm against her driver's side window, so hard the entire car shook. The Honorable Lorraine Washington, 23 years on the federal bench, felt her heart pound as she gripped the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the cold recognition of injustice she'd spent her entire career fighting against. The agent's chest was puffed out, his hand resting on his holster, his lips curled into a sneer that said he believed he was untouchable, that this black woman in this nice car was already guilty of something. He had absolutely no idea that in 72 hours he would be standing in her courtroom. The Texas sun blazed overhead as Judge Lorraine Washington drove along Highway 281, about 90 miles north of the Mexican border. She was returning from Laredo, where she'd spent the weekend celebrating her mother's 80th birthday. It had been a beautiful weekend. Her mother, Ida Mee Washington, had cried when she saw the 3-tier cake Lorraine had ordered, the same lemon pound cake recipe Ida Mee's own mother used to make in rural Alabama 60 years ago. Lorraine smiled at the memory as she drove. At 61 years old, she had accomplished more than anyone from her small hometown of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, ever imagined possible. First in her family to attend college. First to attend law school. First black woman appointed to the Federal District Court for the Southern District of Texas. Her husband, Raymond Washington, was the Assistant Director of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. Her son, Marcus, was a federal prosecutor in Atlanta. Her daughter, Simone, was finishing her residency in pediatric surgery at Johns Hopkins. Lorraine had earned every single blessing through decades of sacrifice, late nights, and refusing to let anyone's low expectations define her. But here's the part that changed everything. As she rounded a curve on the highway, she saw the flashing lights ahead. An immigration checkpoint. Lorraine had passed through checkpoints before. Usually a quick glance at her face, a nod, and she was waved through. But today was different. Today, Agent Derek Caldwell was working the line. Agent Caldwell was 34 years old with a buzz cut, a permanent scowl, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He had been passed over for promotion twice. His supervisor had written him up 3 times for excessive force complaints that Caldwell insisted were lies from illegals trying to game the system. He was angry. He was bitter. And he took out that bitterness on every person he decided didn't belong. When he saw the silver Mercedes S-Class approaching with a black woman behind the wheel, something ugly twisted in his gut. "Well, well, well," he muttered to his partner, a younger agent named Ruiz who stood nearby. "Let's see what we've got here." He stepped directly in front of Lorraine's car and held up his hand. She slowed to a stop. He approached her window with slow, deliberate steps, the walk of a man who believed he owned the road and everyone on it. "License and registration," he said flatly. "No greeting. No good afternoon. Just a demand." Lorraine remained calm. She had dealt with men like this her entire life. "Good afternoon, officer," she said politely, reaching for her purse on the passenger seat. "I said license and registration," Caldwell repeated, his voice rising. "Did I ask for a greeting?" Lorraine paused. She looked at him. 40 years ago, her mother had taught her a lesson she never forgot. "Baby, when you're black in America, you've got to be twice as calm just to survive." So she took a breath. "Of course," she said, "I'm reaching into my purse for my wallet." She handed him her license.
Your hands on the vehicle!
He looked at
Don't
it,
get
then
smart
looked
with
at
me!
her. Then looked at the car. "This your vehicle?" he asked, suspicion dripping from every word. "Yes, it is." "You sure about that?" Lorraine felt the first spark of anger, but she kept her voice steady. I'm certain. I've owned it for 3 years. Caldwell snorted. A lot of drug money coming through here lately. Lot of traffickers driving nice cars they can't explain. Be honest, what would you have done in her position? Lorraine's jaw tightened. I am not a drug trafficker, she said firmly. I'm returning from visiting my mother in Laredo. Is there a problem? But this was only the beginning. Caldwell leaned in closer. His breath smelled like stale coffee and arrogance. Here's the problem, he said slowly. I don't believe you. Step out of the vehicle. Agent Ruiz, the younger officer, shifted uncomfortably. Something about this stop didn't feel right. He'd been working with Caldwell for 6 months, and he'd seen this pattern before. The way Caldwell targeted certain vehicles. Certain drivers. The ones who didn't look right, as Caldwell put it. Ruiz had filed 2 anonymous complaints with Internal Affairs. Nothing had come of them. Caldwell, Ruiz said quietly, maybe we should just. Did I ask for your opinion? Caldwell snapped without looking back. He kept his eyes fixed on Lorraine. Step out now. Lorraine's mind raced. She knew her rights. She knew that at an immigration checkpoint, agents could briefly question occupants about citizenship, but prolonged detention required reasonable suspicion. Demanding she exit the vehicle without cause was a violation. But she also knew something else. She knew that black people had died during traffic stops for far less than asserting their rights. She knew that her robe and gavel meant nothing on this highway. Out here, she was just another black woman being told she didn't belong. May I ask why I'm being asked to exit? She said calmly. Caldwell's face reddened. You don't ask me questions, I ask you questions. He yanked her car door open. Out. Lorraine stepped out slowly, her hands visible at all times. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and navy slacks, the same outfit she'd worn to her mother's birthday brunch. Place your hands on the vehicle, Caldwell ordered. Excuse me. Hands on the vehicle. By now, other drivers in line were watching. Some had rolled down their windows. A few had pulled out their phones. Lorraine placed her hands on the hood of her Mercedes. The metal was hot from the Texas sun. I'm going to search this vehicle, Caldwell announced. On what grounds? Lorraine asked, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was racing. Suspicion of trafficking. I saw you reach toward your passenger seat. Could have been reaching for a weapon. Could have been hiding something. I was reaching for my wallet, which you asked me to retrieve. Don't get smart with me. And just when things seemed calm, Caldwell made his next move. He reached for his radio. I'm calling for a K-9 unit. We're gonna see what you're really hiding. Lorraine closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, of her children, of the hundreds of defendants she had treated with dignity in her courtroom, even when they were accused of terrible crimes. Because dignity mattered. Because process mattered. Because the law meant nothing if it only protected some people. She opened her eyes. What is your name and badge number? She asked. Caldwell laughed. Oh, now she wants to file a complaint. That's rich. Your name and badge number, she repeated. I'm entitled to that information. He leaned in close. So close she could count the pores on his nose. Caldwell badge 4732, and you can complain to whoever you want. Ain't nothing gonna happen. If only he knew how wrong he was. 30 minutes passed. Lorraine stood in the blazing heat. No water. No shade. Other cars were waved through after brief questions, but she was held. The K-9 unit arrived. The dog walked around her car twice. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The dog didn't alert. Because there was nothing to find. Search it anyway, Caldwell said to the K-9 handler. The handler, a woman named Agent Torres, hesitated. The dog didn't hit on anything, Derek. I said search it. Torres glanced at Lorraine with something like sympathy in her eyes, then began searching the vehicle. Lorraine's luggage was pulled out. Her mother's birthday leftovers, packed in Tupperware, were opened and inspected. The lemon pound cake was unwrapped and poked at like it might contain contraband. 45 minutes became an hour. An hour became 90 minutes. And still Caldwell held her. Something's not right about you, he kept saying. I can feel it. But here's the part that changed everything. While Lorraine stood there in the heat, her cell phone began buzzing inside the car. Caldwell heard it. Who's calling you? He demanded. I don't know. My phone is in the car. Probably your supplier checking in, huh? Then the phone buzzed again. And again. And again. Finally, Agent Torres looked at the phone screen. Her face went pale. Caldwell, she said quietly, you need to see this. Torres held up the phone. The contact name on the screen read, Raymond DOJ. Below it, a text message had just arrived. Sweetheart, the Attorney General just called. Your flight to D.C. for the judicial conference is confirmed. See you tomorrow. Love, R. Torres stared at the phone. Then at Lorraine. Then back at Caldwell. Derek, she whispered, DOJ means Department of Justice. Caldwell shrugged. So, probably fake. Drug dealers get creative. No, Torres said, her voice shaking. Look her up right now. Look up Lorraine Washington. Agent Ruiz had already pulled out his phone. His fingers were trembling as he typed the name into Google. What he saw made his stomach drop. Oh my God, he breathed. What? Caldwell demanded. Ruiz turned the phone around. On the screen was the official portrait of the Honorable Judge Lorraine D. Washington, Federal District Court, Southern District of Texas. 23 years on the federal bench. Appointed by the President of the United States. Confirmed by the Senate. The same woman standing in the heat with her hands on her car. Caldwell's face went through 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, denial, fear, anger, and then something that looked like defiance. So what? He said. Judges aren't above the law. If anything, she should be held to a higher standard. Derek stopped. Torres hissed. Just stop. No, I don't care if she's a judge, a senator, or the damn Queen of England. I had reasonable suspicion. You had nothing, Ruiz exploded. The dog didn't alert. She presented valid identification. You've been harassing her for 90 minutes based on what? Caldwell's jaw tightened. He looked at Lorraine. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. The faint recognition that he may have made a very, very serious mistake. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. She can go. He turned and walked away. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just she can go. Lorraine stood frozen for a moment. Her blouse was soaked with sweat. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear anymore. From rage. Pure, righteous rage. She had dedicated her entire career to upholding the Constitution. To ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, background, or status, was treated fairly under the law. And this man had humiliated her. Detained her illegally. Treated her like a criminal. Not because of anything she'd done, but because of what she looked like. She gathered her belongings in silence. She repacked her mother's Tupperware. She placed the ruined lemon pound cake back in its container. And before she got in her car, she turned to Agent Torres. I want a copy of the body camera footage from the last 90 minutes, she said calmly. All of it. Torres nodded slowly. Ma'am, I am so sorry, this shouldn't have. The footage, Lorraine repeated. Please ensure it's preserved. Then she got in her car and drove away. But she wasn't going home. She was going to her chambers. Because what Agent Derek Caldwell didn't know was this. She didn't just have connections. She didn't just have authority. She had something far more powerful. She had jurisdiction. The next 48 hours moved like a gathering storm. Judge Washington filed a formal complaint with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. She filed a separate complaint with the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And she made one phone call to her husband, Raymond, in Washington, D.C. Raymond Washington had spent 30 years at the Department of Justice. He had helped prosecute civil rights cases that made national headlines. He knew exactly which levers to pull. "Lorraine," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "I'm not letting this go." "Neither am I," she replied, "but we do this the right way, by the book." "By the book," he agreed. Within 24 hours, the body camera footage was subpoenaed. And when the investigators watched it, they saw everything. They saw Caldwell slam his hand on her window. They saw him demand she exit without cause. They saw him hold her for 90 minutes despite the K-9 showing no alert. They saw him mock her when she asked for his badge number. And they saw him walk away without a word of apology. But that wasn't the worst part. If only he knew what was coming next. Because when investigators pulled Caldwell's personnel file, they found something else. 17 complaints over 5 years. 17. All from Black or Latino drivers. All alleging harassment, illegal detention, or racial profiling. All dismissed due to insufficient evidence. But now there was evidence. 90 minutes of it. In high definition. And it wasn't just Caldwell who was in trouble. His supervisors, the ones who had dismissed complaint after complaint, were now under investigation too. The storm was coming. And it was going to be biblical. 1 week after the incident, a story appeared in the Houston Chronicle. The headline read, "Federal Judge Alleges Illegal Detention at ICE Checkpoint. Investigation Launched." The story went viral within hours. Cable news picked it up. Social media exploded. Justice for Judge Washington trended nationwide. And suddenly, Agent Derek Caldwell's name was everywhere. His photo was plastered across Twitter. His past complaints were documented on Reddit. Former colleagues came forward anonymously, describing a pattern of racist behavior that went back years. "He used to brag about it," one former partner said in an interview. "He'd say he could smell who belonged and who didn't. We all knew what he meant." Caldwell tried to fight back. He gave an interview to a local news station, claiming he was being railroaded by the liberal media. "I was just doing my job," he said, his face red with anger. "I had no idea she was a judge, and even if I did, it shouldn't matter. The law is the law." But here's the thing about the law. It cuts both ways. Would you have stayed quiet in her position? Because Judge Washington wasn't staying quiet. She announced that she would be testifying before the House Judiciary Committee about her experience. She was invited to speak at the National Bar Association's annual conference. She wrote an op-ed for the New York Times titled, "My robe couldn't protect me, and that's the point." In it she wrote, "I have spent 23 years on the federal bench. I have presided over cases involving the most serious crimes imaginable. I have never been treated with as little dignity as I was on that Texas highway by a man who decided in seconds that my black skin meant I was guilty of something. If this can happen to me, imagine what happens to those without my resources, my education, my connections. Imagine what happens to the women and men who have no one to call, no platform to speak from, no recourse at all." The op-ed was shared over 2 million times. And in DHS headquarters, people started to panic. 3 weeks after the incident, Agent Caldwell was suspended without pay pending a full investigation. But he wasn't going down quietly. He hired a lawyer, a loud, combative man named Harrison Beck, who specialized in defending officers accused of misconduct. Beck held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse in Houston. "This is a witch hunt," he declared. "Agent Caldwell is a decorated officer with years of service. He's being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness because he dared to question a powerful person." The press conference was carried live on several networks. Beck was confident. Caldwell stood behind him, arms crossed, looking smug. They thought they could win. They thought the outrage would die down. But here's the part that changed everything. Because while Beck was speaking, something was happening inside the courthouse. Something that would end Derek Caldwell's career forever. Deep in the archives of the Department of Homeland Security, an analyst named Patricia Odom was doing her job. Patricia was 57 years old. She'd worked in records and compliance for 22 years. And she had been asked to do a comprehensive audit of Agent Caldwell's personnel file. What she found made her pick up the phone immediately. "Sir," she said to her supervisor, "you need to see this, right now." Buried in Caldwell's file, in a folder that had been marked "Resolved," was a complaint from 2 years earlier. The complaint had been filed by another ICE agent, a whistleblower. The agent alleged that Caldwell had detained a Mexican-American family for over 3 hours at the same checkpoint, not because of any legitimate suspicion, but because Caldwell was teaching them a lesson after the father asked why they were being stopped. During that detention, Caldwell had allegedly made comments that were explicitly racist. The whistleblower had reported it. But nothing happened. The complaint was buried. The whistleblower was transferred to another division. And the family, they were undocumented. They were too afraid to come forward. But now everything was being dragged into the light. The analyst kept digging, and she found more. 3 years ago, Caldwell had stopped a black woman named Denise Carter near the same checkpoint. Denise was a nurse from San Antonio, driving to visit her sister. Caldwell detained her for 2 hours. He searched her car without consent. He called her suspicious and uncooperative. When she filed a complaint, it was dismissed. Denise Carter had no idea her case was still in the system. But Patricia Odom found it. And she found 4 more just like it. The full investigative report was delivered to the DHS Inspector General's office on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Agent Derek Caldwell was terminated. Fired for cause. His pension was revoked. His security clearance was stripped. And here's the part no one expected. He was also indicted. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas, a woman named Elena Vasquez, announced federal civil rights charges against Caldwell. "Today, we are sending a message," Vasquez said at the press conference. "No one is above the law, not a citizen, not a judge, and certainly not a law enforcement officer who abuses his badge to terrorize innocent people." The charges included deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, conspiracy to obstruct justice for his role in burying previous complaints, maximum sentence, 10 years in federal prison. Derek Caldwell stood in the booking area of the federal courthouse, handcuffs on his wrists as cameras flashed. The same hands that had slammed against Lorraine Washington's window were now shackled. The same mouth that had told her "ain't nothing gonna happen" was now silent. And the same arrogance that had made him believe he was untouchable, gone. The trial took place 4 months later. It was assigned to Judge Eleanor Patterson of the Eastern District of Texas, a colleague of Judge Washington's, who had been randomly selected to avoid any conflict of interest. Lorraine Washington sat in the gallery on the first day. Not as a judge, as a witness, as a citizen. When she took the stand, the courtroom was silent. "Can you describe what happened on the afternoon of June 14th?" the prosecutor asked. Lorraine took a breath, and she told her story. She told it with the same clarity and precision she had used in thousands of court proceedings over 23 years. She described the heat of the sun on her skin, the sound of Caldwell's palm hitting her window, the taste of humiliation as she stood with her hands on her own car while other drivers watched, the rage she felt when her mother's birthday cake was torn apart, and the resolve, the cold, absolute resolve, that settled in her chest when she decided this would never happen to another person if she had any power to stop it. "I have spent my career believing in the law," she said quietly. "I still believe in it, but the law only works when it applies to everyone. When officers like Agent Caldwell are allowed to abuse their power, when complaints are buried, when supervisors look the other way, the law becomes a weapon against the very people it's supposed to protect." She paused. "I was fortunate. I had resources. I had a voice. But I am not here for myself. I am here for Denise Carter, for the Rodriguez family, for every person who was stopped on that highway and made to feel like they were less than human. They deserve justice too." The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were wiping their eyes. And in the defendant's chair, Derek Caldwell stared at the table in front of him. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked like a man who finally understood that his actions had consequences. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman, a 58-year-old grandmother from Houston named Beverly Thomas, stood to read the verdict. "On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law, we the jury find the defendant, Derek Allen Caldwell, guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. "On the count of false imprisonment, we find the defendant, guilty." Lorraine closed her eyes. "On the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, we find the defendant, guilty." Caldwell's lawyer slumped in his chair. Caldwell himself sat frozen, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. But it was happening. Justice, real justice, was happening. 8 weeks later, Derek Caldwell stood before Judge Patterson for sentencing. His lawyer had asked for leniency. He cited Caldwell's years of service, his lack of prior criminal convictions, the stress of working in a high-pressure environment. Judge Patterson listened. Then she delivered the sentence. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "you swore an oath to protect and serve. Instead, you used your badge as a weapon. You humiliated innocent people. You violated their constitutional rights. And when given the opportunity to take responsibility, you chose defiance." She paused. "The court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison." Caldwell's head dropped. His mother, seated in the gallery, began to cry. But in the row behind her, Denise Carter, the nurse from San Antonio who had been stopped 3 years earlier, was crying too. Not from sadness, from relief. She had been found. She had been believed. And the man who had made her feel like nothing, he was finally being held accountable. But the story didn't end with Caldwell's conviction, because Judge Washington wasn't finished. In the months following the trial, she worked with civil rights organizations to draft new legislation. It was called the Washington-Carter Accountability Act, named after Lorraine and Denise. The bill required all federal law enforcement agencies to preserve body camera footage for a minimum of 5 years, create an independent review board for civilian complaints, implement mandatory bias training with real consequences for violations, provide automatic legal support for citizens who filed complaints against federal officers, The bill passed the House. It passed the Senate. And 6 months after Derek Caldwell was sentenced, the president signed it into law. Judge Washington was invited to the signing ceremony in the White House Rose Garden. She stood next to Denise Carter, who had become an activist in her own right. As the president handed Lorraine the pen he'd used to sign the bill, he said something that made her laugh and cry at the same time. "Judge Washington," he said, "I understand your mother makes an excellent lemon pound cake. I hear it's worth protecting at all costs." Lorraine laughed through her tears. Because that's the thing about justice. It's not just about punishment. It's about healing. It's about recognition. It's about making sure that what happened to you doesn't happen to the next person. 1 year later, Judge Lorraine Washington sat in her chambers, preparing for another day on the bench. On her desk was a photograph from her mother's 81st birthday, the celebration they'd had just a few months earlier. In the photo, Ida Mae Washington was cutting another lemon pound cake, surrounded by her grandchildren. Lorraine smiled at the image. Then she looked up at the wall, where a new frame had been added to her collection of awards and honors. It was a letter, handwritten, from a woman she'd never met. The letter read, "Judge Washington, my name is Maria Hernandez. I was stopped at a checkpoint in New Mexico last month. The officer asked to search my car. When I said no, he got angry. He started yelling at me. I was so scared. But then I remembered your story. I remembered what you did. I stayed calm. I asked for his badge number. I told him I would be filing a complaint, and he backed off. He let me go. I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I found my voice. I'm not scared anymore. God bless you, Maria." Lorraine read the letter for the 100th time. And for the 100th time, tears filled her eyes. This was why she'd fought. This was why she'd spoken up. Not for herself. For Maria. For Denise. For every woman who'd ever been made to feel small. For every mother who'd ever been afraid. For every person who'd ever been told their dignity didn't matter. It mattered. It always mattered. Her victory wasn't just personal. It was a reminder to every black mother, every working woman, every citizen watching, that dignity doesn't disappear at a checkpoint. That your worth doesn't diminish on a highway. That the law, when we fight for it, when we demand it, when we hold it accountable, can be a shield for everyone, not just a weapon for the powerful. Judge Lorraine Washington returned to her courtroom that morning. She put on her robe. She took her seat at the bench. And she continued doing what she had always done. Serving justice. One case at a time. Because that's what black women have always done. We rise. We fight. We protect each other. And we never ever stop. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done at that checkpoint? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because these stories, they're just getting started.